38 seconds. Not a speech. Not a prepared address delivered from behind a podium with the full ceremonial apparatus of a head of government communication deployed around it. Not the kind of carefully constructed public statement that takes a team of advisors, communications directors, legal reviewers, and diplomatic counselors 3 days to produce and another day to wargame against every possible interpretation before the principal delivers it in a controlled environment designed to minimize the variables that turn political communication into political catastrophe. 38 seconds of unscripted, unmediated, direct-to-camera video recorded in Ottawa, released without a press conference, without a prepared statement accompanying it, without the institutional scaffolding that governments normally erect around moments they know are going to matter. 38 seconds that reached the desk of the President of the United States while he was in final preparation for a press conference that his communications team had spent 4 days building, and that the President of the United States watched once, watched again, and then did something that no sitting American president had done in 11 years of modern press conference history. He canceled. Not postponed, not rescheduled to a later time the same day. Canceled. Without explanation, without a rescheduling announcement, without the kind of public statement that a communications operation as sophisticated as the one surrounding this president normally produces to manage the optics of a decision that, in the absence of an explanation, produces its own explanation in the minds of every journalist, every diplomat, every market analyst, and every foreign government that had been watching the clock on that press conference. The cancellation happened. The 38 seconds happened first. And the relationship between those two events is not speculative, not inferred, not the product of political analysis reading meaning into coincidence. It is documented in the accounts of 3 senior White House staff members who were in the room when the president watched the clip, who observed his reaction, and who have described that reaction to journalists covering the administration in terms that are consistent across all 3 accounts in their essential details, despite the 3 sources having no knowledge of each other's accounts when they gave them. What Mark Carney said in those 38 seconds did not just cancel a press conference. It canceled the political framework that the press conference was designed to reinforce. And when the political framework of a presidential press conference is canceled before the press conference happens, the press conference cannot be recovered by rescheduling it, because the framework that gave it its meaning is gone, and rescheduling it in the absence of that framework produces not a recovered press conference, but a visible demonstration of the recovery attempt, which is worse than the cancellation because the recovery attempt is the story, and the story confirms everything the 38 seconds communicated. Here is your first question of the evening, and we want your honest and specific engagement in the comments below. A sitting Canadian Prime Minister recorded and released a 38-second unscripted video that caused the President of the United States to cancel a press conference he had spent 4 days preparing. Do you believe that the power of that clip lay in what Carney said, in how he said it, in the timing of its release, or in the combination of all 3 in a way that none of those elements could have produced independently? Tell us where you are writing from and what background shapes your reading of that question. We will engage with your responses throughout this broadcast because the answer to that question is the answer to a larger question about how political power actually operates in the modern media environment when the old rules about who gets to set the terms of a confrontation are being rewritten in real time. Now let us take you inside the 38 seconds because the clip did not begin with the words that made it matter. It began with 8 seconds of silence and stillness that established everything the words then confirmed. Carney stood in what appeared to be a working office rather than a ceremonial space. No flags visible in the frame. No institutional backdrop selected to communicate the authority of the office rather than the authority of the person. No lectern, no prepared notes, no visible evidence of the apparatus that surrounds a head of government when a head of government is performing the role rather than occupying it. The setting communicated a specific thing before a word was spoken. This is not a performance. This is a person telling you something he has decided you need to hear in the setting where he actually works, without the mediation of the institutional machinery that normally stands between a political leader and direct communication with an audience. 8 seconds of that setting. Then Carney looked directly into the camera. Not at a point slightly above the camera that approximates eye contact while allowing the speaker to read from a screen. Directly into the lens. The directness of the eye contact is not a trivial detail. It is the visual communication of the same quality that the setting communicated, no mediation. You and I directly. What I am about to say is not filtered, not softened, not constructed to manage your reaction. It is what I actually think, delivered without the distance that political communication normally maintains between the leader's actual position and the public expression of it. He spoke for 30 seconds after the 8-second opening. What he said in those 30 seconds is not reproducible in full without the 8 seconds that preceded them and the silence that followed the last word. The clip functions as a unit. Its power is the power of the complete unit, not of the words extracted from it. But the structure of what he said in those 30 seconds can be described, and the structure is the strategy, and the strategy is what canceled the press conference. Carney opened with a single declarative sentence that established a factual predicate. Not an opinion, not a characterization. A documented, verifiable, publicly confirmable fact about the state of the trade confrontation between Canada and the United States that the White House's own public statements had contributed to establishing as part of the public record. The fact was selected with the precision of a lawyer establishing the record before making the argument because the fact made the argument unnecessary. When you establish a fact that contains its own conclusion, the argument that follows the fact is not persuasion. It is permission for the audience to reach the conclusion the fact already contains. He then built 3 additional sentences, each adding a layer to the factual predicate, each selected for the same quality as the first, verifiable, documented, drawn from the public record that both governments had contributed to creating. By the 4th sentence, Carney had constructed a factual architecture whose logical conclusion was so clearly visible that the 5th sentence did not need to state it. The 5th sentence stated it anyway, clearly, without diplomatic qualification, without the hedging language that allows political statements to be reinterpreted by the party they are directed at in ways that reduce their force, without strategic ambiguity, without any of the technical mechanisms that political communication normally employs to say difficult things in ways that leave the difficulty negotiable. The 5th sentence was not profane. It was not aggressive. It did not attack a person or demean an office or use the language of confrontation that produces the kind of political controversy that shifts the story from the content of a statement to the manner of its delivery. The 5th sentence was a conclusion, stated as a conclusion, in the language of a conclusion, with the finality of a conclusion that has been reached at the end of a process rather than asserted at the beginning of an argument. And the conclusion was this: Canada had been patient. Canada had been reasonable. Canada had extended every good faith effort that a sovereign nation could extend to an ally that had chosen economic coercion over mutual respect, and Canada was done. Not escalating, not threatening, not declaring a new phase of retaliation that would generate its own headlines and its own counter-response in the escalating cycle that trade confrontations normally produce. Done. As in, the framework within which the confrontation had been managed was no longer operative, and the framework that replaced it was simpler and less negotiable and required no further explanation because the 38 seconds had provided all the explanation that was needed. Second question of the evening, and we want your genuine analytical assessment. Carney's 38-second clip was structured to make its conclusion feel like the inevitable product of a factual predicate rather than a political choice. That structure is a specific rhetorical technique with a specific effect. It makes disagreement with the conclusion feel like disagreement with the facts rather than disagreement with the interpretation of the facts. Do you believe that structural technique was more responsible for the clip's political impact than its content? And do you think the White House communications team recognized the technique quickly enough to build a response strategy around it? Or did the technique itself prevent the construction of an effective response by making every available response look like a dispute with documented facts? Comment below and specify whether your analysis draws on communication strategy experience, rhetorical theory, political consulting background, or media analysis expertise. We are receiving responses from viewers with direct professional experience in presidential communications whose assessment of why the clip was unanswerable is more specific and more technically detailed than anything in the public political commentary. The White House learned about the clip's release at 9:47 in the morning. The press conference was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 4 hours and 13 minutes between the clip's arrival at the White House and the moment the press conference was supposed to begin. 4 hours and 13 minutes is enough time to draft a response strategy, workshop it against every conceivable follow-up question, prepare the principle, and execute the press conference from a position of having absorbed and addressed the clip before the first question about it was asked. It is, under normal circumstances, sufficient time to manage a political surprise from a foreign government that does not have the institutional apparatus to generate surprises at the speed and precision that the American political communications infrastructure is designed to absorb and neutralize. These were not normal circumstances. The clip was not a political surprise that the White House communications infrastructure was designed to absorb. It was a specific category of communication that infrastructure has no established protocol for neutralizing, because the infrastructure was designed for a political environment in which the President of the United States is the dominant communicator and every other communicator is responding to a framework that the President sets. The clip did not respond to the President's framework. It established an alternative framework and invited the global audience to evaluate the President's behavior within it. An alternative framework established with documented facts delivered with 8 seconds of stillness and 30 seconds of direct-to-camera declarative sentences, released without a press conference or a prepared statement or any of the institutional machinery that would have given the White House communications team the procedural handholds it normally uses to engage, dispute, and neutralize a foreign government's political communication. The communications team met at 10:15. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. In a communications operation that prides itself on decision speed, a 2-hour and 20-minute meeting to address a 38-second clip is the operational signature of a team that could not find a response that passed its own tests. Every response strategy that a communications team generates gets tested against the same criteria before it reaches the principal. Does this response change the story, or does it extend it? Does this response address the clip's content, or does it draw more attention to it? Does this response project strength, or does it reveal that the clip has produced a defensive posture that strength-projecting communication is specifically designed to conceal? The 2-hour and 20-minute meeting produced 4 draft response strategies. All 4 failed one or more of those tests. The meeting ended without an approved strategy. At 12:43 in the afternoon, 77 minutes before the press conference was scheduled to begin, the decision was made to cancel. The decision was made by the President, not by the communications director, not by the Chief of Staff, not through the normal delegation process by which a president authorizes a senior staff member to manage a scheduling decision that does not require the principal's direct involvement. The president made the decision himself, which tells you that the decision was not experienced as a scheduling matter. It was experienced as a strategic matter. And strategic matters at that level, in that administration, in that political environment, get decided by the principal, because the principal's judgment about what the decision communicates is the only judgment that the administration's operational culture treats as authoritative. The president decided that appearing at a press conference whose first 20 minutes would be consumed by questions about a 38-second clip from Ottawa was worse than the optics of canceling the press conference. That calculation tells you what the president assessed the clip had done to the press conference's utility as a communications instrument. A press conference is a controlled environment for projecting a chosen narrative. The 38-second clip had replaced the president's chosen narrative with Carney's factual predicate before the press conference began. Appearing in that environment meant appearing inside Carney's framework rather than the president's own. The president calculated that canceling was preferable to appearing inside a framework he had not constructed and could not dismantle in the time available. The cancellation was communicated to the press pool at 1:17 in the afternoon. No reason was given. The absence of a reason was the reason. A White House that has a good reason for canceling a press conference gives the reason because the reason is the narrative management. A White House that gives no reason has calculated that any reason it could offer would generate more damaging follow-up questions than the unexplained cancellation itself. The calculation is defensible in the narrow tactical sense that an unexplained cancellation is a one-day story whose explanation is inferred. An explained cancellation whose explanation is challenged, disputed, or contradicted by the 38-second clip it is trying to account for is a multi-day story whose evolution the White House cannot control. One day of inferred explanation versus multiple days of disputed explanation. The White House chose one day. The press corps did not cooperate with the one-day timeline. 3 senior White House correspondents, each with more than a decade of experience covering presidential communications, filed analyses within 4 hours of the cancellation that made the relationship between the 38-second clip and the canceled press conference explicit, documented, and sourced to administration officials whose accounts were consistent enough to establish the relationship as fact rather than inference. The analyses ran on the front pages of the publications that the administration's own senior staff reads before they read anything else in the morning. The one-day story became the story of the week before the day was over. The diplomatic response from allied governments moved with a subtlety that diplomatic responses to moments of this kind always move with, and that subtlety always communicates more precisely than explicit statement, because what a government chooses not to say in a diplomatically sensitive moment tells you more about its actual assessment than what it chooses to say. The United Kingdom's Foreign Office made no statement about the clip. The absence of a statement from a government that maintains the closest intelligence and diplomatic relationship with the United States of any foreign government in the world is not oversight. It is a considered decision. A considered decision by the United Kingdom to not express concern about a Canadian Prime Minister's 38-second video that caused the American president to cancel a press conference is the United Kingdom's way of expressing something it cannot express directly, that the concern, if it had one, pointed in a different direction than the clip. Germany's response was more structurally significant. The German Chancellor's office released a statement within 24 hours of the clip that made no reference to it and addressed trade policy in language that, read alongside the clip's factual predicate, aligned with Carney's factual architecture more closely than with the White House's characterization of the trade confrontation. The alignment was not accidental and was not coincidental. It was the German government's way of indicating, through the alignment of its language with Carney's framework rather than the White House's, that Europe's largest economy had evaluated the 38 seconds and reached a conclusion about which government's account of the trade confrontation it found more credible. Germany did not say that. Germany communicated it through the framework of a statement about something else. That is what European diplomatic sophistication looks like when it is performing at its highest level. The financial markets registered the press conference cancellation and its relationship to the 38-second clip with the speed that markets always bring to political developments whose implications for policy stability and predictability are immediate and measurable. The connection between a canceled press conference and a market movement is not intuitive until you understand what a presidential press conference is in market terms. It is a scheduled moment of policy signal delivery. Markets price the information they expect to receive from a press conference before the press conference happens. When the press conference is canceled without explanation, the information that was expected to arrive does not arrive, and the market's priced expectation has to be revised. The revision depends on the market's inference about why the cancellation occurred. When the cancellation's relationship to a foreign leader's 38-second clip is documented and sourced in front page within 4 hours, the market's inference has a foundation. The foundation is, the administration's policy communications framework has been disrupted by a foreign government in a way significant enough to cancel a scheduled policy signal delivery event. Disrupted policy communications frameworks produce policy uncertainty. Policy uncertainty is priced negatively. The Dow dropped 280 points in the final 90 minutes of trading on the day of the cancellation. 3 currency trading desks issued internal notes within the same trading session, noting that the Canadian dollar's continued strengthening against the US dollar, now in its 5th consecutive week, had received a new interpretive data point from the press conference cancellation that reinforced the currency market's existing assessment of relative political positioning in the trade confrontation. 5 consecutive weeks of Canadian dollar strengthening against the US dollar during a trade confrontation between Canada and the United States is a sustained market judgment that the balance of the confrontation favors Canada. The press conference cancellation extended the streak's interpretive logic for another session. Currency markets that sustain a directional judgment for 5 consecutive weeks have not made a trading call. They have made a structural assessment. The structural assessment is that Canada's position in this confrontation is stronger than the United States' position in ways that the official communications of both governments are not fully describing, and that the 38-second clip and the canceled press conference are the most visible surface expressions of a structural reality that the currency market has been pricing for 5 weeks. The domestic political fallout within the Republican Party moved faster than the White House communications team had anticipated, and in a direction that the administration's internal political modeling had not assigned significant probability to. 2 Republican senators released statements within 24 hours of the cancellation that expressed support for the administration's trade objectives, while raising what both statements described as concerns about strategic communication consistency in the bilateral relationship with Canada. Strategic communication consistency is the language that Republican senators use when they want to say that the administration's handling of a foreign policy matter has been visibly disrupted by a foreign government without using words that could be characterized as criticism of a Republican president by a member of his own party. The language is careful. The statements are not. Two Republican senators raising strategic communication consistency concerns within 24 hours of a press conference cancellation tied to a Canadian Prime Minister's 38-second clip is the Republican caucus beginning to create the procedural record that protects its members if the trade confrontation continues to produce moments that the administration cannot manage with the tools it has been using. Procedural records created in advance of anticipated problems are the legislative equivalent of the Canadian targeting matrix. They identify the exposure before the exposure becomes the story, and they position the record creators on the right side of it before the story determines which side that is. The 38 seconds traveled further and faster and with more lasting consequence than anything the 4-day press conference preparation produced, which tells you something fundamental about how political power operates in the current environment that neither government has yet fully incorporated into its strategic planning. The side that speaks last does not win. The side that speaks most completely does not win. The side that establishes the framework within which the other side's communication is evaluated wins, and frameworks are established not through institutional apparatus or communication volume or the deployment of the full machinery of a superpower's political communication infrastructure, but through moments of direct, factually grounded, structurally precise communication delivered with the stillness and the directness and the absolute absence of mediation that make an audience stop performing the interpretive work that political communication normally requires them to perform and simply receive what is being said as the thing it actually is. Third and final question of the evening. A 38-second clip canceled a presidential press conference, moved currency markets for the 5th consecutive week in the same direction, produced a German diplomatic alignment statement, generated Republican senatorial concern language, and dropped the Dow 280 points in 90 minutes of trading. Do you believe this moment represents a durable shift in the balance of the Canada-United States trade confrontation? Or do you believe the administration has the institutional and political resources to reestablish its communications framework and recover the initiative in ways that make the 38 seconds a notable episode rather than a turning point? And do you believe Mark Carney understands what he has built, or do you believe the clip's effectiveness exceeded even his assessment of what 38 seconds of direct-to-camera factual predicate could do to a 4-day press conference preparation? Comment below with your reasoning and tell us whether your perspective is shaped by political communications experience, diplomatic analysis, financial markets expertise, or Canadian-American relations history. The responses arriving from viewers with direct professional experience in presidential communications are producing an assessment of the clip's structural power that the public political commentary has not yet fully articulated. Here is where this stands with every implication visible. Mark Carney recorded 38 seconds in a working office in Ottawa, 8 seconds of stillness and direct eye contact, 30 seconds of a factual predicate built from 4 sentences that contained their conclusion before the 5th sentence stated it. No flags, no lectern, no institutional apparatus, no press conference, no prepared statement, no strategic ambiguity. The clip reached the White House at 9:47. The communications team met for 2 hours and 20 minutes and produced 4 draft response strategies that all failed their own tests. The president canceled a 4-day preparation press conference at 12:43, 77 minutes before it was scheduled to begin. He made the decision himself. The press pool was told at 1:17 with no reason given. 3 senior White House correspondents sourced the relationship between the clip and the cancellation to administration officials and front-paged it within 4 hours. The Dow dropped 280 points in the final 90 minutes of trading. The Canadian dollar strengthened for the 5th consecutive week. Germany released a statement whose language aligned with Carney's factual framework rather than the White House's. The United Kingdom said nothing, which was the United Kingdom's statement. 2 Republican senators used strategic communication consistency language within 24 hours. 38 seconds, 1 working office. 1 person looking directly into a camera with nothing between him and the audience and nothing between the audience and the conclusion that the facts he had selected in the order he had arranged them made impossible to avoid. The press conference is canceled. The framework it was designed to reinforce is gone. The currency market has been pricing the structural reality underneath the framework for 5 weeks. And the 38 seconds are still traveling, still being watched, still being shared, still arriving in offices and trading desks and foreign ministries where people are watching them and then watching the president's decision to cancel and then doing the calculation that the 38 seconds were designed to make them do and arriving at the conclusion that the factual predicate was designed to make inescapable. The clip is still running. The press conference is still canceled. And the distance between 38 seconds and 4 days of preparation tells you everything you need to know about which side of this confrontation currently understands how power actually works. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe to this channel for daily updates. The